Okay. This Chewbacca has transformed. This is what happens when Chewbacca hangs around for too long. He becomes like this. Now we know the real purpose. Very good. Let's see, here is one who's getting ready to get ordained, one over here. Okay, very good. Okay. Oh yeah. Is this the same Chewbacca Lehar? It's a different Chewbacca. I don't know. It's over here. It's on the pile of things over there. Okay. I think someone prefers this one. We can put Chewbacca a little bit further away. We'll be all right. Yeah. I think someone maybe scared somebody. I don't know. Maybe it looks too fierce. You know. Okay, Chewbacca. Okay, anyway. All right, one of the things you learn from Ajahn Brahmali is not to take anything too seriously, but to have a bit of fun and enjoyment. That's kind of what the Dharma is about in the end. So that's great. So thank you for putting this bear over here. That's wonderful. Anyway, let's come back to the suttas. And so as I mentioned before today, we have sort of been looking at more the right view kind of side of things. Yeah, the idea what freedom is from a number of different angles. But then, of course, we need to know what to do. Yeah, how do we get to that freedom? How do we get to even a little bit of freedom? And so this is what the next suttas are going to be about in various ways. And some of those suttas you will recognize. They are the same suttas that I like to do quite generally. And some of them will be suttas that you perhaps have not seen before so much. And so we'll see how things go. So the first sutta here is called What's the Purpose? And this is, again, from the AN. This is the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, the first sutta. And the 10th chapter of tens, I should say, the 10th chapter in the Anguttara Nikaya. So this is a kind of sutta which really is about meditation practice. And there's many ways you can look at the idea of meditation practice. You can look at the idea from the point of view of the object. What are you watching? Or the subject, if you like. Maybe sometimes object is the wrong way of thinking about it, because in the Dhamma there isn't really any objects as such. Or there are objects, but they're always changing. Nothing is fixed. And when you think about things in terms of object, it's already kind of going a little bit away from how the Dhamma works. It is changeable phenomena is what we're dealing with. So sometimes subject of meditation is a more useful way of thinking about things than objects of meditation. So that is one way. So for example, when we look at the Anapanasati Sutta or the suttas on developing metta and loving kindness and compassion and these things, we are kind of looking at things from the point of view of the subject of the meditation. But this particular sutta here is looking more from the point of view of the experience. How is meditation experienced? It doesn't even talk about what to watch, doesn't say anything about the object that you're using. It just talks about how you are supposed to experience it when it works in the ideal way. This is like idealized. Nobody experiences it exactly like this. I've never met anyone who has exactly this kind of sequence. But it kind of gives you a rough, when things are going well, you can recognize these steps. You can see what is going on. And so it gives us a map of the terrain, a map of the territory, how the mind kind of develops when it kind of goes according to Dhamma in the ideal way. And that is very, very useful. It gives you the ability to make some judgments about whether you are heading in the right way or not, whether you need to make adjustments, etc., etc. So this is what this is about. And so let's dive into this and see what it has to say. So, like most suttas, it starts with, so I have heard, evan me sutang. At one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, another Pindika's monastery. Then Venerable Ananda went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, Sir, what is the purpose and benefit of ethics, of skillful ethics? Yeah, fair point. What is the purpose of it? Ananda, having no regrets, is the purpose and benefit of skillful ethics. But what is the purpose and benefits of having no regrets? Joy is the purpose of and benefit of having no regrets. But what is the purpose and benefit of joy? Rapture is the purpose and benefit of joy. What is the purpose and benefit of rapture? Tranquility is the purpose and benefit of rapture. What is the purpose and benefit of tranquility? Bliss. And what is the purpose and benefit of bliss? Stillness. What is the purpose and benefit of stillness? Truly knowing and seeing. What is the purpose and benefit of truly knowing and seeing? Disillusionment and dispassion, perhaps. And what is the purpose and benefit of disillusionment and dispassion? Knowledge and vision of freedom is the purpose and benefit of disillusionment and dispassion. So as always, the final benefit, the end of the path, is the idea of freedom. And not just freedom, but the knowledge and vision of freedom. Yeah, you know that you are freed. When you are freed, you know that you are freed. And so this is the ending of the path. This is the purpose. And it all starts with ethics at the beginning. Sila is the beginning point of all of this. And so this is kind of ideally how you expect to experience meditation. Yeah, going through these steps as the stillness deepens, as the meditation becomes more profound, and you kind of go through these stages one by one. And you may already have experienced some of the early stages, the early ones like the joy and these kind of things. I probably not so many who have gone all the way to the end of the sequence. I usually ask how many arahants in the assembly, and usually not so many. But one of these days, if someone will raise their hand, it's actually, it just happened just now. I just went all the way to the end. So suddenly things happen. You never know. I must admit, it's not all that likely, but it can happen, right? You can get some deep insights, and so it's good to know the map. And if you understand the map, then you have some idea of what is going on. Now, what is the most important part of this whole sequence is the going up to stillness. It's called immersion on your sheet there, but I prefer the word stillness. That is the most important part, because if you get to that point, then the rest kind of tends to happen. It's kind of one of those very interesting things about the Noble Eightfold Path, is that it ends in samma samadhi. Samadhi is the end point. And so people then say, well, what about insight? What does insight happen? Isn't insight supposed to be part of this? And the answer is that part of the path to samadhi, to get to samadhi, you need lots of insight. There's no such thing as samadhi without insight. So on the path, on the way getting there, part of this process is already a lot of insight and understanding. And then once you get to the samadhi, well, the remaining insight happens almost as a matter of course once you get to the stillness, the profundity of the mind. So the most important part here is the path up to samadhi. And so I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to talk about the rest as well, but not so much, because that is the most interesting part. Now, if you look at those parts up to samadhi, it starts with virtue. And then you start to look at the other factors that are mentioned there. And those factors are all joy, rapture, bliss, tranquility, non-regret is one of them. And if you look at that, it's pretty positive. It's pretty it's pretty remarkable. It is incredibly positive. It's all about joy and happiness and all of these kind of things. And that gives you a very clear idea of how important these things are in Buddhist meditation. Buddhist meditation is not dry, it is not boring, it is incredibly exciting and interesting. You don't really get so excited, but it's really kind of, wow, this is just extraordinary. And when I read these kind of suttas, and this sutta, I should say, is very important. And the reason why it is important, as I mentioned before, this kind of structure is found everywhere in the suttas. This kind of sequence, sometimes you may find slight variations on the theme, but essentially the structure is found in so many places. And primarily, it is found as the 7 factors of awakening. 7 factors of awakening look largely like this, very, very similar. And the 7 factors of awakening are part of the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, which is part of the core teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha says so himself, this is the core teachings. And so this is absolutely crucial Dhamma that you see here, the dependent liberation sequence. As I also mentioned, you see it also in the Anapanasati formula, the mindfulness of breathing, basically the same ideas. So this is what Dhamma really is about. It's about building up all of these positive qualities. 2 things always stand out when it comes to meditation practice: the joy and the happiness, and that tranquility and calm and peace on the other hand. These are the 2 qualities that you can measure, if you like. If you want to measure, you want to judge how your meditation is going, you judge it by these 2 qualities primarily. There are many other things you can also measure it by, but these are the 2 most important ones. Are you becoming peaceful? Are you experiencing joy? These are like the milestones. When you travel on the road, they have in the old days, I'm not sure if they had it here in Australia, but it was everywhere in Europe. They had this kind of little stone on the side of the road and would say, Paris, 250 kilometers, and then Paris, 249, So this is a bit like that, Nibbana, 5 million kilometers, And then you get closer and closer as you go closer. So these are like the signposts on the way. You know you're heading in the right direction there. And very, very positive. And I think it's very important to remember this because too many people, they grasp the idea of meditation in the wrong way. They have this idea of no pain, no gain. So pain in meditation, that's the path. But the Buddha doesn't really talk about pain in meditation anywhere. It is not something, it's not really part of the suttas. The only place you find it is in the Satipatthana Sutta, where it talks about the various kind of feelings you're supposed to understand. And there it talks about dukkha, the painful feelings. But understanding is different from experiencing. There you have to understand it. But understanding means you can also understand through overcoming, through the ending of things. And so you can also understand painful feelings by experiencing happy feelings. You don't have to go through those things. Of course, in reality, meditation is never just pure pleasure. There's going to be sometimes some difficulties, there's going to be little pains, and you will all know about that already. If you didn't know before you came here, you know now after 5 days. Because the body is like that. The body is never perfectly without problems. In the suttas, the Buddha says that the body is an abyss of painful feelings. It is endless. You can't overcome it. That's the nature of the body. So notice this, because it's so common to go kind of to not really understand how meditation is supposed to work. To kind of indulge too much in pain, to think that pain is somehow going to be good. And that very often the reason why people practice like that is because of an exclusive use of the Satipatthana Sutta as a guide for meditation. But that is not very wise to use only one sutta, because if you use only one sutta, you might get it wrong. You want to use a diversity of teachings and then put them all together, and then you understand what is going on. So it's marvelous, isn't it? It's because when you read this, you think, wow, that is just so attractive. And when I read these kind of things, I always think, why isn't the whole world Buddhist? That's what I tend to think. Why are they messing around with other religions. I shouldn't be saying that. I get into trouble if I say kind of, but it's kind of true, right? What other religions has this kind of meditation experience? Where do you find this sort of thing? A beautiful path, very practical. You are told how you're supposed to do this, stage by stage. Okay, it may not be easy, it may not happen straight away, but the map is kind of there. Yeah, who wants to be an atheist after you read this? You want to become a Buddhist, yeah? All you have to do is watch the breath anyway. It's perfectly compatible with atheism. You can be an atheist and a Buddhist at the same time, as far as I'm concerned. And so you know, it's just so beautiful. And these are the kind of teachings that I think we should teach more in the Dhamma. I tend to be way too negative in the way I teach, too much about dukkha. Yeah, Ajahn Brahm, if you heard me, he'd probably not be too happy. Ajahn Brahm is all about happiness. This is one of the reasons I always found the way Ajahn Brahm teaches Dhamma so incredibly attractive. And that's one of the reasons I came to Australia, actually. I heard Ajahn Brahm, thought, wow, Ajahn Brahm, he's my teacher. Bang, got on the flight, came to Australia. That's kind of, it was very funny because I remember I heard about Ajahn Brahm, and one day I just picked up the phone. I didn't write any letters or anything. I picked up the phone and dialed the number to Australia, and I said, hello. Oh, this is Ajahn Brahm. Oh, hi Ajahn. Can I come to Australia? And he says, who are you? And so I didn't even introduce myself. I just can I come to Australia? And then I told him I'm kind of an anagarika here in England, and whatever. And then he said, okay, you can come to Australia. And that's kind of how I ended up in Australia. It's pretty random, isn't it? But of course, it isn't really random. That's the other side of things. Actually, there's many underlying things there. This is the positive idea of Dhamma, the positive idea of meditation. So how does it come about? And one of the things that is not so clear from this particular sutta is that this process is essentially automatic. Yeah, there's another sutta which comes just after this one, which has exactly the same sequence, but between each of the stages in the sequence, it says that this cannot be done by an act of will. Yeah, in other words, moving from one stage to the next one cannot be done by an act of will. Na cetanaya karaniya, not to be done by intention, not to be done by the will. And then it says, why is that? Because it's a dhammata. Dhammata means it's according to nature. This is the way the process works. And so this whole sequence, this is one of the reasons why you don't want to make too much effort in your meditation, because effort is an act of will, and that is not how the results come about. The way the results come about is because your mind is primed in the right way, because you have a right view, because you are allowing things to happen in the right way, because the foundations are in place, and the foundations are the most important thing. And so this whole sequence, it starts with skillful ethics. It starts with sila, that's the beginning of the sequence. And so if it doesn't happen automatically, it's because that first factor isn't powerful enough yet. That is the reason why it doesn't work. Yeah, and this is what I was kind of talking about before, that the idea that ethics and sila is the foundation of everything. And once you get that right, it flows by itself. The path just moves. And so if you find that, your meditation only goes so far, you get to a plateau, it doesn't go any deeper, well, the main reason, the most likely reason, is that your ethics aren't purified enough yet. So more ethical conduct, more compassion, more kindness, the way you think about people, the friendliness, the goodwill you have to the world, all of these things have to kind of be in place. And for most people, there is more we can do there. It's very hard to purify this fully. And so that is usually the area where you want to look. That is one part of it. The other part is the view. The view also matters enormously, because the views we have about the world is what gives our values. And our values is what we are interested in. That is what gives our priorities. And so if you value the worldly things, if you value, yay, you're going to go back and have dinner in a few days' time, I'm going to go back. It's like that. If you use the dinner, I can understand why people might think that. Oh, we're going to go back to my house. Yeah, well, I'm going to get back to my own bed, and what have you, that people are kind of holding on to in this life. And so if you have those worldly ideas about entertainment and enjoying the world, if it's important for you to kind of succeed in your work and your career, if your family may be very important to you, whatever it might be, your mind is going to go there because those are your values. And where your values are is where your mind is going to incline. Those are going to be your priorities. And so you are going to think about those things in your meditation. This is kind of right view, or rather wrong view, but related to right view. However, the right view, having the right kind of values, is understanding the limits of that world, how it is not really that interesting. Yes, you make the most out of being a kind person. You do your best at work because that's what decent people do. Yes, you treat your family to the best of your ability because it's part of the path anyway to treat people well. So you do all of those right things. But you realize that there is more to life than that. There are things that are more important. And so your values, you get things the right way around. Instead of having kind of the family and the worldly values on top, and the spiritual values are there to support your worldly life, you turn it upside down, and your worldly life is there to support your spiritual life. And so you live your worldly life, you live your work, your family, your hobbies, everything in such a way that you imbue them with spiritual qualities, with kindness, with care, with compassion, with all of these things. And then your spiritual life really comes out of that. So the whole thing becomes this beautiful package. And of course, that is also very beneficial for your worldly life as well. But important to get the priorities right. What is on top and what comes underneath. And that is, in large part, what right view is about. Understanding these things. And so these two things coming into place, that is when the sila, here sila, morality, is very, very broadly defined. Even right view kind of comes, it's kind of part of sila to some extent. So it's a very broad kind of thing. There's a set of qualities called the dasa kusala kamapata in the suttas, which means the 10 pathways of wholesome actions, or 10 ways of wholesome actions. And that is basically virtue plus right view, or undistorted view, is where that is from. So that is what you have to do. And the more you do that, the more you purify that virtue, that sila, the less regret you have. You have non-regret. This is the next factor here. The abhipattisari is the Pali word, in case you are interested. You have no regrets. And as I mentioned yesterday, the idea of no regrets is much more than kind of not upbraiding yourself because of your bad conduct. No regret means that your mind is bright. It's no blemishes in your mind. The mind doesn't go dark. It doesn't go dull because you have kind of done things. You don't feel joyful because you have done something that was a bit dodgy or whatever. That is kind of the idea of regret here. It darkens the mind. It dulls the mind down. Whereas if you have no regrets, the mind is going to be bright as a consequence. So it's kind of a profound idea here, the idea of non-regret. So when you purify the virtue fully, you have no regrets. And if you have no regrets, you automatically have joy. This is where the sequence becomes automatic. These things, this is just the nature of things. And very often in meditation, all you have to do is to wait for a while, wait for the coarse disturbances in your mind to die down, the tiredness, whatever, restlessness because of your activities. And then because all of these things are ready under the surface, waiting to come out, all you have to do is wait, and these things will start to arise. And you will feel glad, you will feel joy. Pamudja arises in your life. Pamudja is the initial gladness. What does that feel like? Well, it feels like when the mind is joyful, you're kind of happy, skipping around, joyful, happy, feeling light and bright in your life. Some days can be like that. Not all days are like that, maybe, but sometimes days can be like that. And you feel light and happy and joyful, and life is going your way. That's kind of the starting point of happy qualities, rising out of the sila, non-regret and joy. And here, this can happen in daily life. Yeah, it can happen at any time you're feeling this kind of joy, really. But also, it happens more likely in meditation. And the reason, of course, is because you're sitting down and you're allowing the superficial realities or superficial aspects of life to fade away. And so the joy gets a chance to emerge from the dust of life, the dry dust of life. It kind of gets eliminated, and then the joy kind of comes forth underneath. And then, because you are more likely to find this in meditation, now you are meditating. And as you're meditating, these qualities start to arise, stage by stage. More and more profound qualities come out of the meditation. So the joy will then transform into piti here. Piti is like strong joy, joy that is often felt physically. Feels a bit like currents in the body maybe, but joyful currents. Someone had a question last night about the strong kind of joys where even the heart was starting to beat a bit faster. And this I think is very likely to be a sign of this kind of piti, the rapture, where you feel very kind of strong, powerful currents or waves of things going through the body and the mind. Not always, but that is quite a common experience. So now it's this is not common for people to have in ordinary life. Now you are really going into the meditation experience. As you are calming down, as the breath becomes more refined, these things start to come about, stage by stage. And then you have to carry on. You carry on. That rapture, the physical rapture, starts to become tranquilized. And out of that piti, the purpose of that piti is to reach tranquility. It becomes even deeper. So you become tranquil, the joy and the happiness becomes more refined. It is not that you lose it, it's just that it becomes more refined. And so there's a tranquility there. And in taking its place, it's a far more refined kind of happiness. That is called the bliss here. A thing that is much more tranquil, doesn't have the same physical component as before. So you become calm, you become solid. At this point, you sit there, you feel like this rock. You don't want to do anything in the whole life. It feels so marvelous. You can't imagine moving or going anywhere. You don't want to ever leave the Jhana Grove. Lehar, please, can I stay on for an eon in Jhana Grove? And Lehar gives you a special pass for the eon. So that's what it feels like. You don't want to move anywhere. Why? Because you're perfectly content. This is where contentment happens. That's why it's called tranquility, because you're so content, so happy. And at this point, the body is already fading in the background. You barely notice its existence. There's still a bit of breath there. There's certainly no very, painful feelings, but basically don't exist at this point. It's all kind of fading away. And you're feeling more and more tranquility, more and more bliss. So happy to be there. And of course, because the bliss and the tranquility is so powerful, it draws you into the meditation. The object of meditation, at this point you start seeing nimittas, the lights in the mind and these kind of things, and it draws the mind in because it is so beautiful, it is so powerful. You don't want to do anything else. And that is where samadhi can happen. You get drawn in to the light, you enter the jhana states and these kind of things as a consequence. So this is this idea of meditation, stage upon stage, deeper and deeper happiness, deeper and deeper tranquility. This is the samatha aspect of meditation, the calming aspect of meditation. With that calm comes insight. At every stage of this meditation, you have more clarity. Your mind is free of hindrances, the mind is tranquil, the mind feels incredibly powerful at this stage. It is very energized, mindfulness is incredibly strong, because with the peace, with the bliss comes very powerful mindfulness. You want to be here. Why on earth would you want to be anywhere else? You're present, very powerfully present. And because the energy is strong, the clarity is strong, the mindfulness is strong, you also, the insight, the vipassana basically means clear seeing, is also very powerful. But you don't analyze what is going on at this point, because if you analyze at this point, you destroy the samadhi. So you keep on enjoying the samadhi and you take it as deeply as you possibly can. And then afterwards, when you come out of the samadhi, that is when you look back upon what you were doing here. You will have noticed that at the end of every meditation, I say, try to understand the meditation here. That is part of this idea, except that most of the time it's much more rudimentary than that. It's just understanding how to become peaceful, etc. But as you go deeper, this idea of reviewing the meditation, it becomes part of the insight practice, where you understand the 5 khandhas. 5 khandhas are the 5 aspects of personality, and if you go very deep, you start to understand those 5 aspects of personality in a very profound way. You start to see how they disappear, how they fade away, how they how you can live without them, how they change all the time, how they morph into something else. And as you see that, you gain insight into what can be abandoned easily, what you can happily abandon, so much better off without it, right? And so you kind of get rid of, you shed large parts of these khandhas until there's very little left. And because there's very little left, it is very easy to gain insight into that which remains. And that's where you make this kind of deep breakthroughs into the Dhamma. So from that samadhi comes the yata bhuta jnanadassana, seeing things in accordance with the reality. Truly seeing and knowing is what Bhante Sujato calls it here. You truly know and see things. Because samadhi gives you the data. The mind emerges from that. You can see how things work in terms of the mind and also the body. So this is the process, and then I will just finish off the whole process. I might as well do that now. So when you truly know and see, well, what happens? And what happens when you truly know and see? It says here you get disillusioned, but I know Ajahn Brahm, this is the word nibbida. Ajahn Brahm would translate it as maybe repelled. You get repelled. Because what you are feeling here is you want to give up things. You want to get rid of it. Because what you are seeing, remember what you are seeing is dukkha. The whole path of practice is understanding of things in terms of the 3 characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, suffering, and non-self. So what you're seeing is suffering. And because what you're seeing is suffering, your mind turns away from that. You don't want to hold on to suffering, right? If you really see suffering, if you understand, actually I'm holding on to coals. If that's what you see, let go, right? You don't want to hold on to those coals. And so you let go completely. This is what is going on here. Are you disillusioned with that coal you're holding? If you have a burning coal in your hand, can you call that disillusionment? Probably not, right? It's more like you are repelled by it, or you have aversion towards it. You want to get rid of it. It is not a negative aversion in the sense that it is a defilement. It is just understanding where dukkha is. It's a turning away from something, moving in a different direction. And this is the result of insight, seeing things in the right way. So you turn away from the 5 khandhas. You turn away from all that is dukkha. And because you turn away from that, craving eventually disappears, because you cannot crave for dukkha. Once you see these things enough times, you gain what is called here dispassion. Dispassion is just anti-craving. It's the giving up of craving. You can't crave for these things anymore. And eventually, when you give up craving completely, then you gain freedom. And then when you have freedom, you gain the knowledge and vision of freedom. Vimutti jnanadassana, which is the purpose and the end of the entire path. So this is how this works. This is kind of the path of meditation for you. And this is remarkable sequence of causes and conditions. And it's such a beautiful thing. And the last part of the things that I talked about are, for those of you who have been around for a long time, I'm sure you can relate to those things. But for those of you who are a bit more new to meditation, I wouldn't be too concerned about those things, because just enjoy the beginning parts of the meditation and see where it takes you. And as long as it is fun, as long as it is enjoyable, then carry on and see where it goes. The promise here is a very profound and beautiful promise, but it can be a bit difficult to relate to, especially in the beginning. So this is the idea of the purpose, why we are doing this whole thing here, yeah, where it is all heading here. This is kind of what this is all about. So there you are. Sounds good, doesn't it? So let's just finish off the very last paragraph of this particular sutta. So Ananda, the purpose and benefit of skillful ethics is not having regrets. Joy is the purpose and benefit of not having regrets. Rapture is the purpose and benefit of joy. Tranquility is the purpose and benefit of rapture. Bliss is the purpose and benefit of tranquility. Stillness is the purpose and benefit of bliss. Truly knowing and seeing is the purpose and benefit of stillness. Aversion or repulsion and dispassion is the purpose and benefit of truly knowing and seeing. Knowledge and vision of freedom is the purpose and benefit of repulsion and dispassion. So, Ananda, skillful ethics progressively lead up to the highest. So, okay, so that is the sutta on the what is the purpose. And so even if you take only one thing from this retreat, maybe that sutta is what you want to take with you, because it's very encouraging and very positive, and it has that, I think, ability to kind of make you committed and persevere on this path when you see what is going on. So now let us move on. Maybe I shouldn't move on. Maybe I should stay with that sutta for a bit longer because it's sometimes too much information. But as usual, I choose too many suttas for these retreats. So we have to kind of slowly move on to the next one. And the next one is also, to my mind, very interesting sutta that I very often also read out on these retreats. It comes in a couple of different versions. This is a version I don't usually talk about. And so this one is called Craving. This is also in the Anguttara Nikaya 10, so the same chapter, but this is number 62 rather than number 1, which was the previous one. So let us see what it has to say. So it starts off by the Buddha saying, mendicants, it is said that no first point of craving for conditioned existence is evident, before which there was no craving for continued existence, and afterwards it came to be. And yet it is evident that there is a specific condition for craving for continued existence. So I will comment a little bit on this, because this already is actually quite interesting in many ways. This is just the starting point of this sutta. But the Buddha is saying no first point of craving for continued existence is evident, before which there was no craving for continued existence, and afterwards it came to be. You cannot find the first point of this. And elsewhere you see the same thing about ignorance or avidya or delusion. There is no first point of ignorance in the world. Or I should say in the world, I should say within a being. There is no first point. And the idea here is that if you remember your past lives, you will see the same thing in your past lives. Exactly the same thing. You will see the same kind of ignorance, or the same kind of delusion, or the same kind of craving for existence. Craving for existence has always been there. This, because this is the thing that drives you on from birth to birth. So it had to always be there. And so you go back and back and back, and there is no first point. So another way of thinking about this is that there is no first birth. Another way of thinking about it is that there is no beginning of the world, because the world is, it is basically our experiences. The universe doesn't have a beginning point. It just goes back in time. It doesn't matter how far back you go. The Buddha talks about going back many eons, many kind of universal contractions and expansions, and there is no first point. No first point can be discovered, is what he is saying here. And that is radical. When you think about the vast majority of religions in the world, or sometimes even the scientific outlook, It is about the beginning of the things. Yeah, some God creates the universe, and bang, it comes into existence. That's how things usually are said to start. Or sometimes some scientists say it all began with the Big Bang. Yeah, Big Bang came into existence before that. Well, we don't know what was before that. Maybe there was nothing. Unsure what was before that. So Buddhism is really the only, to me, teaching, spiritual teaching that has a reasonable explanation. Actually, there is no first point. There must always have been something before that that gave rise to what came afterwards. Yeah, to me, that is such a sensible, such a remarkable way of looking at the world, because that kind of hangs together. It makes sense. How can the first point really make any sense? Because how did that first point start? Yeah, it needs something. It can't just come out of nothing. That's kind of weird. Yeah, so conditionality going back. And the other thing that the Buddha is saying here, he says that there is no discoverable first point. He doesn't say that there is no first point, but no point that is evident or discoverable. Discoverable is another way of saying this. Continued existence has no discoverable beginning. And this is about the pragmatic way of the Buddha, that when he talks about reality of the world, he talks about what he has seen. He has not found a beginning point, but he doesn't say that there is no beginning point, because you cannot go back infinitely into the past. You can only go so far. Yeah, you can go back and back and back. At some point, you have to say enough, because you can't just spend your whole life just going back and still not get to the beginning. Because if it is infinite, then there is no first point, and so there is no discoverable beginning. So it is like this pragmatic idea. He presents the evidence as it is and doesn't really go beyond the evidence. In some later Buddhisms, ideas of Buddhism, they actually say that there is no first point. But that is more like a statement that is more speculative, something you cannot really actually know. Maybe I sometimes wonder whether you can know it by inference, but it is more uncertain. Yeah, the reality is that what is discoverable is what the Buddha teaches us. And so this, to me, is one of many, many things that make the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, so powerful, because it gives an explanation of the world that actually makes very, very good sense. Yeah, it is not it doesn't come from a need to explain things. Yeah, it comes more from a discovery of reality, and that is how the Buddha does things. So the starting point of this sutta is also quite interesting for this reason. So, but then he says, there may not be a first point that is evident or discoverable, and yet there is a specific condition for craving for continued existence. In other words, there are conditions for this, and those conditions are necessary for this to carry on. So what that means is that it can be stopped. There may not be a beginning point, but it can be stopped, because if we understand the conditions for it, then there can also be an ending here. So this is what the next part of the sutta is about. It is a conditional sequence going back stage by stage to like the very first point that drives this whole sequence, ending up with continued existence, ending up with ignorance, ending up with dukkha, with suffering, right? These are all the same thing. Continued existence is really just another way of saying dukkha, saying suffering. It's another way of saying delusion. It's another way of saying the world. It's another way of saying the five khandhas. It's another way of saying nama rupa paccaya vijnana. All of these things are just the same way of looking at existence, if you like. So let's find out what the causes of dukkha, of continued existence, actually are. So then the Buddha says, I say that craving for continued existence is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for continued existence? You should say ignorance. Avidya. Avidya is like delusion. It's the lack of insight, the lack of understanding, the lack of seeing things according to reality. That is what that avidya actually is. The opposite is vidya, which is understanding and seeing things deeply. So here you have bringing in the idea of fuel. Fuel means that if you add more fuel to the fire blazes up, it becomes more powerful. So each of these factors are fuel for the one which comes afterwards. So the more we add of the preceding factor, the more ignorance you have, the more delusion you have, the more desire for existence you have. If you reduce the fuel, if you start to take out those logs and the grass or the fire or whatever, then you are reducing the ignorance, you're also reducing the desire for existence. So the idea of fuel here is an important one. Ahara, I think, is the Pali word here for fuel. The nutriment for one thing to the next one. It fuels the next one. And if you take the fuel away entirely, well, then you can actually make these things end. So the fuel here is an important metaphor that is used for, you strengthen those qualities, it becomes worse, you reduce them, it becomes better, you remove it entirely, and you can undo the whole sequence as a consequence. So, avidya is the problem. Ignorance or delusion is the fuel, or the specific condition for continued existence. And then the Buddha goes on. I say that delusion, that ignorance, is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for ignorance? You should say the 5 hindrances. It is a good thing that ignorance is fueled. If ignorance was unfueled, if delusion was unfueled, there would be no way out of it. Because it would be a solid entity that was always there. But the fact that it is fueled is a very good news for us, because it means you can get out of it. You can get out of the delusion. How? By, first of all, reducing the 5 hindrances and then eventually eliminating them completely. When you eliminate the 5 hindrances completely, then ignorance becomes very weak, and that's where it can be overthrown, and you can get the opposite of ignorance, which is knowledge and understanding. I say that the 5 hindrances are fueled by something, they are not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the 5 hindrances? You should say the 3 kinds of misconduct. Misconduct by body, speech, and mind. Those are the 3 kinds. So this is basically just virtue, profound virtue. The opposite, lack of virtue. So I'm just going to go through them for now, and I will explain them a little bit later, what each one of these actually mean. I say that the 3 kinds of misconduct are fueled by something. They are not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the 3 kinds of misconduct? You should say lack of sense restraint. I say that lack of sense restraint is fueled by something, it is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the lack of sense restraint? You should say lack of mindfulness and situational awareness. I say that lack of mindfulness and situational awareness is fueled by something, it is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for lack of mindfulness and situational awareness? You should say unwise attention. Or if you like, irrational application of the mind. I think unwise attention is a bit easy to understand, so stay with unwise attention. I say unwise attention is fueled by something, it is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for unwise attention? You should say lack of faith, or if you like, lack of confidence. I say that lack of confidence is fueled by something, it is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for lack of confidence? You should say listening to an untrue teaching. This is the asadhamma savanang, the not true teaching, a non-dhamma teaching. I say that listening to an untrue teaching is fueled by something, it is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for listening to an untrue teaching? You should say associating with untrue persons. Asapurisa sangseva is the Pali word for that. So sapurisa are the true people, and a true person here is basically the Aryans, the noble ones, the ones who have insight into the Dhamma is what we're talking about. So that is the root problem. And that is, of course, very interesting because it has some very powerful implications. If you understand the root problem of all ignorance and all suffering and everything, then you can do something about it. And if it is about who we are associating with, easy, yeah? Just hang out with the Buddha, associate with the real deal, yeah? Then you are in business. Can you hang out with the Buddha? Of course you can. That's what we're doing on this retreat. That's the whole point of reading the suttas. We're hanging out with the Buddha. You thought the Buddha was dead, but in a sense, he is dead. Yeah, and in another sense, he has left a legacy, and that legacy are the suttas, and he left that for our benefit. So we can still hang out with the Buddha, even though he's not here. This is kind of one of those great things. So hang out more with the Buddha. That is the root cause. The root cause of dukkha, suffering. Not enough hanging out with the Buddha, hanging out with other dodgy characters. Yeah, hanging out with, not dodgy characters, but hanging out with people who don't really understand the meaning of life, who don't really understand what this is about. Yeah, that is kind of the issue here. And so we need to change our friendship. We need to change who we are living with. That is kind of the purpose of all of this. But what I would like to do now is to look at this also from the positive perspective, because now we have looked at the negative perspective, how each factor fuels the next one in a negative way, but the more interesting one is the positive way, how at the root of things, getting things right from the very beginning, how that leads stage by stage to the positive outcome of awakening or freedom, if you like, which is what we're talking about here. But before we do that, we look at the summary here, yeah, the summary of what is, or how this is then related, and this is kind of quite nice. It has a nice simile with it as well, and it says in this way: when the factor of associating with untrue persons is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of listening to untrue teachings. When the factor of listening to untrue teaching is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of lack of confidence or faith, which fulfills the unwise attention, which fulfills the lack of mindfulness and situational awareness, which fulfills the lack of sense restraint, which fulfills the lack of the 3 kinds of misconduct, which fulfills the 5 hindrances. That's kind of scary, isn't it? It fulfills the 5 hindrances. It just sounds terrible. It sounds like your mind is absolutely packed with kind of all of these terrible qualities, yeah? Ill will, desire, restlessness, tiredness, all together in one go, doubt, uncertainty. That's kind of what it says, fulfilled. Imagine these things being fulfilled. Whoa, scary. And then the 5 hindrances, well, what do they fulfill? They fulfill ignorance, or if you like, delusion, or if you like, lack of insight. Lack of proper understanding of life and how life works. And when that ignorance is fulfilled, it fulfills the craving for continued existence. You are desperate to exist more. You are desperate to carry on. You will do anything in the world to kind of carry on in one way or another. And you have no idea of a spiritual path or anything else. And that's the fuel for craving for continued existence. And that is how it is fulfilled. It is like when the heavens rain heavenly on a mountaintop, and the water flows downhill to fill up the hollows, the crevices, and the creeks. As they become full, they fill up the pools. The pools fill up the lakes fill up the streams, and the streams fill up the rivers. And as the rivers become full, they fill up the ocean. That is the fuel for the ocean. That is how it is filled up. Yeah, it kind of gives you an idea of how this works. If you, the rain on the mountaintop, eventually, if it keeps on raining like that, and raining and raining and raining, eventually it reaches the ocean via the large rivers. Of course, it takes a lot of rain. So you have to hang out with a lot of untrue people. And the more you hang out with those untrue people, the more the rain comes down on that mountaintop, and all of these negative consequences happen. And the more dodgy those people are, the quicker that rain falls on the mountaintop. And if you hang out with incredibly dodgy people, you get a lot of rain on that mountaintop, and you go to the ocean very, very quickly. But even if you hang out with people who are not dodgy, but maybe even good people, but they have wrong views, they have wrong ideas, it is like it's drizzling on the mountaintop. And if there is enough drizzle, that drizzle too eventually reaches the ocean. Yeah. So the idea here is that unless you have someone who really understands deeply what is going on, only then do you stop that rain on the mountaintop. And the idea is to turn it into a different kind of rain. There's two kinds of rain. There is the bad rain and there is the good rain. There is the acid rain. Have you heard about acid rain? Yeah, that's what we had in Norway. We were always very upset with the English people, because in England they had all these factories and things. This was back in the 60s and 70s. And then the prevailing winds always went from the UK to Norway. And so all these industrial fumes went up into the clouds and came over to Norway, and then rained down in Norway. Isn't that really unfair? That's really unfair. And then kind of all this acid came down in Norway. That's kind of what's going on here, the same kind of idea. All this acid, acidifying the lakes, acidifying the oceans. So this is how you get acid rain. But the same idea, of course, works out when you hang out with the right kind of people, when you associate with the good people, then the rain is no longer acid. It's pure rain, sweet rain, nicely drinkable water, like the drinking water here in Jhana Grove. Yeah, it's nice rainwater. I hope it is anyway. I'm not sure. I haven't checked it. And so then it has the opposite effect, and that is what we're going to look at next, the opposite effect. But before we do that, let's just one more time summarize this thing, and then tomorrow we will look at the reverse side. The Buddha says, in the same way, when the factor of associating with untrue persons is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of listening to untrue teachings. And when the factor of listening to an untrue teaching is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of lack of faith or confidence, which in turn fulfills the factor of unwise attention, or if you like, irrational application of the mind, which then fulfills the lack of mindfulness and situational awareness, which fulfills the lack of sense restraint, which fulfills the 3 kinds of misconduct, which fulfills the 5 hindrances, which fulfills ignorance, delusion, lack of insight, darkness in the mind. And when that ignorance, when that darkness is fulfilled, it fulfills the craving and desire for continued existence. That is the fuel for craving for continued existence. And that is how it is fulfilled. So I apologize for leaving you on that negative note. It's not so, but remember that there is a positive side to this, and so use the positive side to inspire your meditation. And that is all for now. So please carry on enjoying yourself, and we'll see you back this evening at 7 o'clock. Very good.